The year was 1832. A bitter winter had descended upon the modest frontier settlement of Hollowcreek, Missouri. The snow fell heavy upon the wooden rooftops of the scattered cabins, and the wind howled through the bare branches of the oak trees that surrounded the isolated community. It was during this unforgiving season that the tale of the three Blackwood brothers began. A tale that would haunt the dreams of Hollowcreek's residents for generations to come. Hollowcreek was like many other frontier settlements of its time, a collection of hearty souls who had ventured westward in search of land and opportunity. Farmers, trappers, and merchants made up the bulk of its population, with a small church and general store serving as the heart of community life. Most folks knew one another by name, and strangers were rare enough to warrant attention and suspicion. Our story begins with Dr. Samuel Thornton, the settlement's only physician, who had come to Hollowcreek some 5 years prior. After completing his medical training in Philadelphia, he was a man of science in a place where superstition still held sway, and though respected for his learning, he was often regarded with a mixture of reverence and weariness by those he treated. On the night of January 17, 1832, as the temperature dropped to a punishing degree, Dr. Thornton was roused from his sleep by a frantic pounding at his door. Wrapping himself in his woolen coat, he shuffled to the entrance of his small cabin to find Jacob Miller, the settlement's blacksmith, standing before him, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Dr. Thornton," Miller gasped, his voice tight with urgency. "You must come. Quickly. It's the Blackwood place. Martha's time has come, but something's not right. She's been in labor since yesterday morning, and the midwife says she's never seen the like of it." Without hesitation, Dr. Thornton gathered his medical bag, a leather satchel containing his surgical instruments, tinctures, and herbs, and followed Miller into the night. The journey to the Blackwood homestead was arduous, their horses struggling through the deep snow as they traveled the 3 mi beyond the settlement's edge. The Blackwood farm sat isolated from its neighbors, nestled against the edge of a dense forest that the locals had taken to calling the Whispering Woods. Ezekiel Blackwood had moved his wife Martha to this remote location some 8 months prior, purchasing the property from a family that had abandoned it under mysterious circumstances. The couple kept to themselves, rarely venturing into Hollowcreek, and little was known about them beyond Ezekiel's claim that they had come from Kentucky seeking a fresh start. As they approached the farmhouse, Dr. Thornton could hear Martha's agonized screams cutting through the howling wind. The sound sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold. There was something unnatural about the pitch and duration of those cries, something that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit by candles and a roaring fire. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and something else, something putrid and unfamiliar. Martha lay upon the bed, her nightgown soaked with sweat despite the chill. Her face was contorted in pain, and her belly seemed to shift and undulate in a manner Dr. Thornton had never witnessed in his years of delivering babies. Beside her stood Widow Hawkins, the settlement's experienced midwife, her weathered face pale with fear. "I've never seen anything like it, Doctor," she whispered as Thornton approached. "The babes move within her as if they are made of liquid. I can feel no limbs, no heads, just movement, like snakes writhing beneath her skin." Dr. Thornton removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. "Babes? You speak of more than one child?" "3, by my reckoning," the midwife replied. "But they ain't natural, doctor. No babe should move as these do." In the corner of the room, Ezekiel Blackwood sat rigid. In a wooden chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. He was a tall, gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes so dark they appeared almost black in the dim light. He made no move to acknowledge the doctor's arrival, his lips moving silently as if in prayer. Dr. Thornton approached Martha and placed his hands upon her distended abdomen. What he felt beneath his palms defied all medical understanding: movement without structure, weight without solidity. It was as if whatever grew within Martha Blackwood was not fully formed, or perhaps formed in a way that medicine had never documented. For hours, the doctor worked to deliver the babies, employing every technique he had learned during his training. The labor was unlike any he had attended, with Martha's screams giving way to an eerie silence as she slipped in and out of consciousness. When the first child finally emerged, Dr. Thornton nearly dropped it in shock. The infant, if it could be called such, was pale as moonlight, its skin nearly translucent. But what truly horrified the doctor was the child's consistency. It seemed to lack any skeletal structure, its limbs bending and folding in impossible ways as he lifted it from the birthing bed. And when he cut the umbilical cord, not a drop of blood emerged, neither from the cord nor from the infant. "What in God's name?" he whispered, cradling the strange child. Despite its otherworldly appearance, the baby lived, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Its eyes a cloudy colorless white blinking up at him. The midwife crossed herself and backed away. "It ain't natural," she repeated. "No bones, no blood. It ain't of this world." Before Dr. Thornton could respond, Martha's body convulsed as the second child began to emerge. The process repeated itself, and soon the doctor held a second infant identical to the first, boneless, bloodless, yet undeniably alive, and then a third, completing the trio of impossible children. Throughout the delivery, Ezekiel remained motionless in his corner, his muttered prayers growing more fervent with each child's arrival. Only when the third infant had been cleaned and swaddled did he finally rise and approach the bed where his sons lay beside their exhausted mother. "The Blackwood brothers," he said, his voice devoid of the joy one would expect from a new father. "Elijah, Isaiah, and Jeremiah." Dr. Thornton observed the man carefully, noting the lack of surprise at his children's condition. "Mr. Blackwood," he said cautiously, "your sons, they appear to have been born with a condition I have never encountered. They seem to lack both skeletal structure and blood. I must ask, has anything like this occurred in your family before?" Ezekiel's dark eyes lifted to meet the doctor's gaze. "They as they were meant to be," he said cryptically. "The vessels have been prepared." Before Dr. Thornton could question him further, Martha Blackwood let out a weak moan from the bed. The doctor turned his attention to her, alarmed by her paw and the strange consistency of the fluid that continued to seep from her body. Not blood, but a clear, viscous substance that reminded him of tree sap. "She needs care," he said firmly. "I must return to my cabin for additional supplies. And these children, they require further examination. You have done your duty." Dr. Ezekiel replied, his tone making it clear that the physician's services were no longer required. My wife and sons will be tended to according to our ways. Widow Hawkins, who had been silent since the delivery of the first child, suddenly clutched at Dr. Thornton's arm. We should leave this place, she whispered urgently, before nightfall. This ain't right, Doctor. None of it. Despite his medical curiosity and concern for Martha and the infants, Dr. Thornton found himself agreeing with the midwife's assessment. There was something deeply unsettling about the Blackwood farm, something that went beyond the strange nature of the newborn triplets. Reluctantly, he packed his medical bag, leaving detailed instructions for Martha's care and promising to return the following day. As he and Widow Hawkins departed, mounted on their horses with Jacob Miller leading the way, Dr. Thornton glanced back at the isolated farmhouse. In an upstairs window, he could have sworn he saw a figure watching them, a figure too tall and thin to be Ezekiel Blackwood. Upon returning to Hollow Creek, Dr. Thornton immediately began documenting the night's events in his medical journal, sketching the unusual appearance of the Blackwood triplets, and noting their apparent lack of both skeletal structure and blood. His scientific mind sought rational explanations. Perhaps a new form of congenital condition or an unknown disease that affected fetal development. But in the days that followed, rationality gave way to mounting dread as the strangeness surrounding the Blackwood family deepened. True to his word, Dr. Thornton attempted to return to the farm the day after the birth, only to find the path blocked by fallen trees that hadn't been there before. When he finally reached the property 2 days later, taking a circuitous route through the Whispering Woods, he found the farmhouse eerily quiet. Ezekiel answered his knock, standing in the doorway with his imposing frame blocking any view of the interior. Your services are not required, Doctor, he said flatly. My wife and sons are thriving. As a physician, I must insist on examining them, Dr. Thornton replied, attempting to maintain his professional authority. The condition your children were born with is unprecedented in medical literature. They may require specialized care. A cold smile spread across Ezekiel's gaunt face. They are receiving exactly the care they need. The transition has begun. Transition? I don't understand. You need not understand, Doctor. Only know that my boys will grow strong in their own way. Now I must ask you to leave our property and not return. We value our privacy. With those words, Ezekiel closed the door, leaving Dr. Thornton standing bewildered in the snow. As he mounted his horse to return to Hollow Creek, the physician couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was unfolding at the Blackwood farm, something beyond his medical expertise to address. In the weeks that followed, rumors about the Blackwood triplets spread through Hollow Creek like wildfire. Widow Hawkins, despite Dr. Thornton's request for discretion, had spoken freely about the unnatural birth she had witnessed. The settlement burst with speculation and fear, with some suggesting that the babies were changelings left by forest spirits, while others whispered of witchcraft and dark pacts. Dr. Thornton tried to quell the rumors with scientific explanations, but even he struggled to account for what he had seen. His letters to medical colleagues in Philadelphia went unanswered, and his own research into congenital abnormalities yielded no conditions that matched the Blackwood brothers' peculiar characteristics. As winter gradually gave way to spring, the Blackwood family remained isolated on their farm. Ezekiel was occasionally seen purchasing supplies at the general store, but Martha and the infants never accompanied him. When questioned about his family, his responses were too and uninformative, stating only that his wife was recovering well and the boys were growing as expected. It was in late April, as the last of the snow melted and the forest began to green, that the first disappearance occurred. Thomas Reed, a trapper who worked the areas near the Whispering Woods, failed to return from his rounds. A search party found his cabin empty with no signs of struggle, but a strange viscous substance on the door frame, similar to what Dr. Thornton had observed during the Blackwood birth. A month later, young Sarah Collins, the 13-year-old daughter of the miller, vanished while gathering early spring berries at the forest's edge. Again, the only clue was a trail of clear sap-like fluid leading into the Whispering Woods in the direction of the Blackwood farm. The settlement grew fearful, with many casting suspicious glances toward the isolated Blackwood property. Yet, no one dared approach the farm, partly out of fear and partly because Reverend Clark, Hollowcreek's preacher, counseled lead patients and warned against baseless accusations. "We must not give in to superstition and fear," he told his congregation during Sunday service. "The Lord tests us in many ways, and jumping to conclusions without evidence is the devil's work." But Dr. Thornton could not quiet his growing concern. The coincidence of the disappearances and the strange fluid, so similar to what he had witnessed during the triplets' birth, weighed heavily on his mind, and there were other oddities that the townspeople had begun to report. Livestock found drained of fluids, but without any wounds, unusual sounds echoing from the Whispering Woods at night, and sightings of what some described as children moving like water at the forest's edge during the full moon. Determined to uncover the truth, Dr. Thornton began keeping watch on the Blackwood farm from a distance, camping in the woods with his medical bag and a hunting rifle for protection. For several nights he observed nothing unusual, though the constant whispering of the wind through the trees, the source of the forest's name, set his nerves on edge. It was on the fifth night of his vigil, as a full moon hung heavy in the sky, that Dr. Thornton witnessed something that defied rational explanation. From the farmhouse emerged 4 figures, Ezekiel leading, followed by what appeared to be 3 small children, though their movement was fluid and unnatural, more like pouring water than walking. The strange procession made its way into the Whispering Woods, and Dr. Thornton followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding in his chest. The forest at night was a maze of shadows and sounds, but the pale forms of the Blackwood children seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, making them easy to track despite their unsettling flowing gait. After nearly an hour of walking, the group arrived at a clearing that Dr. Thornton had never seen before. A perfect circle of barren ground surrounded by ancient oak trees. At the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, crude and ancient-looking, stained dark with what the doctor feared was centuries of blood. Ezekiel positioned his 3 sons on the ground before the altar and began to chant in a language that Dr. Thornton did not recognize, guttural and rhythmic, with sounds that no human throat should be able to produce. As the chanting intensified, the air in the clearing seemed to thicken, and the whispers of the forest grew louder, almost drowning out Ezekiel's voice. Then, to the doctor's horror, the 3 Blackwood brothers began to change. There already Fluid forms seemed to melt further, their limbs elongating and twisting in impossible ways. Their pale skin turned translucent, revealing not organs and bones, but swirling iridescent patterns. Beneath, patterns that shifted and moved like living symbols. From the trees emerged shadowy figures, tall, emaciated. Beings with limbs too long and joints that bent in wrong directions. They encircled the altar, their movements jerky and disjointed as if they were puppets controlled by unseen strings. Dr. Thornton pressed himself against a tree trunk, praying he wouldn't be discovered. His rational mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. Searching for scientific explanations, mass hallucination, unknown toxic substances in the forest air, his own exhaustion playing tricks on his perception. But he could not deny the visceral terror that gripped him as he watched Ezekiel produce a curved knife from beneath his coat. A blade made not of metal, but of what appeared to be bone, yellowed with age. The tall man approached the altar where a figure now lay bound. A figure Dr. Thornton had not noticed before, but now recognized with horror as Martha Blackwood, her pregnant belly distended once again. The vessels must be fed, Ezekiel inned, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. The brothers must grow. The gate must open. Dr. Thornton knew he should intervene, should try to save Martha from whatever horrific ritual was unfolding. But his body refused to move. Locked in place by a paralyzing fear that went beyond rational thought. This was not something a man of science could combat. This was something ancient and wrong, something that should not exist in a world governed by natural laws. As Ezekiel raised the bone knife above his wife, Dr. Thornton finally broke free from his paralysis and fumbled for his rifle. But before he could take aim, one of the shadowy figures turned toward him, revealing a face, if it could be called such, that consisted only of a vertical slash where a mouth should be. The doctor fired his rifle in panic, the shot echoing through the clearing. Ezekiel whirled around, his dark eyes finding Dr. Thornton's hiding place. Instantly, the bone knife still raised, he pointed toward the physician with his free hand. "Witness," he commanded, and the three fluid forms of the Blackwood brothers suddenly flowed across the ground with impossible speed, surrounding Dr. Thornton before he could reload his weapon. Up close, the children were even more horrifying. Their faces recognizable as human infants, but their bodies constantly shifting and changing. Tendrils of their translucent flesh reaching out toward the doctor like curious fingers, their colorless eyes fixed on him with an intelligence that no 4-month-old child should possess. "You should not have followed us, Dr. Ezekiel's voice called from the altar. But perhaps it is providence that you are here. The brothers require substance to complete their transformation. Your knowledge and intellect will serve them well." Dr. Thornton tried to run, but the fluid forms of the triplets surrounded him, their bodies merging together to create a living prison. As they touched his skin, he felt a burning sensation, followed by numbness, as if his very life force was being drawn out through his pores. "What are they?" he gasped, feeling his strength ebbing. "What are you?" Ezekiel approached, the shadowy figures parting to allow him passage. "They are the vessels," he said simply, "and I am their shepherd. We have waited centuries for the right alignment of stars, for the right bloodline to produce not one but 3 suitable hosts. The Blackwood line has been carefully cultivated for Generations for this purpose. Hosts for what? Dr. Thornton managed to ask even as his vision began to dim. For those who came before, Ezekiel replied, those who ruled this land long before your kind arrived. Those who will rule again once the brothers reach maturity and the gate is opened. The last thing Dr. Thornton saw before losing consciousness was Martha Blackwood on the altar, her belly splitting open, not with blood and tissue, but with that same clear, viscous fluid from which emerged more of the writhing symbol-covered forms like those of her sons. When Dr. Thornton awoke, he was lying in his own bed in his cabin in Hollowcreek, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, he believed he had dreamed the entire horrific experience. The clearing, the altar, the transformation of the Blackwood brothers. But the weakness in his limbs and the strange circular marks on his skin where the fluid forms had touched him confirmed the reality of his encounter. More disturbing still was the gap in his memory. He had no recollection of how he had returned to his cabin, or why he had been spared when he had clearly been intended as some form of sacrifice or sustenance for the triplets. Rising on unsteady legs, he noticed a folded piece of paper on his desk that had not been there before. Opening it, he found a message written in an elegant hand. Your time will come, Doctor, but not yet. The brothers have tasted your knowledge and found it valuable. They wish to learn more of your world before they transform it. Watch for them. They will be growing quickly now. The note was unsigned, but Dr. Thornton had no doubt it had come from Ezekiel Blackwood or whatever entity might be using the man's form. Determined to warn Hollowcreek of the danger in their midst, Dr. Thornton dressed hurriedly and made his way to Reverend Clark's home. The preacher listened to his tale with growing alarm, his initial skepticism giving way to concern as the doctor showed him the strange marks on his skin and the note left on his desk. I have heard whispers, the Reverend admitted reluctantly. Old stories passed down among the native tribes who once inhabited these lands. Tales of beings who came from beyond the stars, who could take human form but required hosts born without structure. Vessels, they called them. Then you believe me? Dr. Thornton asked, relieved to find an ally. I believe something unnatural is occurring, Reverend Clark replied carefully. Whether it is as you describe or something else, I cannot say, but we must investigate further before bringing this to the settlement. Fear can be a dangerous thing, Samuel. It can turn good people into a mob. Together, the two men formulated a plan. They would gather a small group of trusted individuals, Jacob Miller, the blacksmith, Sheriff Hollister, and two of the settlement's most experienced hunters, to return to the Blackwood farm, and if necessary, the clearing in the Whispering Woods. But when they arrived at the farm the following day, they found the property deserted. The farmhouse stood empty, though signs of recent habitation remained. A still warm hearth, food on the table, clothing in the wardrobes of Martha Blackwood and her sons. There was no trace, though the bedrooms prepared for the children contained strange markings carved into the walls and floors, symbols that matched those Dr. Thornton had seen swirling beneath the triplets' translucent skin. They've moved on, Sheriff Hollister concluded. Probably caught wind that the doctor here was asking questions. No, Dr. Thornton said, examining a substance on the children's bedroom floor. The same clear, viscous fluid he had come to associate with the Blackwood brothers. They haven't left. They've changed, transformed further. Led by Dr. Thornton's recollection, the group ventured into the Whispering Woods, searching for the clearing with the stone altar. But the forest seemed to shift around them, paths disappearing and reappearing, landmarks changing position. After hours of increasingly frustrated searching, they were forced to concede defeat. As darkness approached, the woods protect them, one of the hunters muttered, always known there was something wrong with this forest. As the group made their way back toward Hollow Creek, Dr. Thornton noticed something unsettling. The whispers that gave the forest its name seemed to have changed. Where before they had been indistinct, now he could almost make out words. Childish voices speaking in unison, just below the threshold of comprehension. The following weeks brought a series of increasingly disturbing incidents to Hollow Creek. More disappearances occurred, not just of people, but of knowledge. The school teacher woke one morning unable to recall basic mathematics. The settlement's best seamstress could no longer remember how to thread a needle. Dr. Thornton himself discovered gaps in his medical knowledge. Techniques and remedies he had once known intimately, now frustratingly beyond his recall. And there were sightings, glimpses of 3 identical boys at the edge of town, always at dusk or dawn, their movements fluid and wrong, their eyes colorless and knowing. They never approached, never spoke, merely watched with an unchild's stillness before melting away into the shadows when anyone tried to approach them. Most disturbing were the changes in the children of Hollow Creek. They began speaking of the brothers in hushed, reverent tones, drawing strange symbols identical to those found in the Blackwood farmhouse and sleepwalking toward the Whispering Woods at night. Parents took to locking their children's bedroom doors and windows, but still they would find the young one standing at the forest's edge come morning with no memory of how they had escaped their rooms. Dr. Thornton documented everything meticulously in his journal, searching for patterns and explanations. He noted that the moon was waxing again, approaching the fullness it had displayed on the night he had witnessed the ritual in the clearing. Whatever the Blackwood brothers were becoming, whatever purpose Ezekiel had prepared them for, the doctor suspected that culmination was approaching with the next full moon. His suspicions were confirmed when Reverend Clark discovered an ancient text hidden beneath the floorboards of the church. A journal written by the settlement's founder, dating back to the early 1800s. The journal spoke of a cycle of disappearances and strange phenomena that had occurred approximately every 30 years, always culminating in a night of horror during the spring's final full moon. The last cycle would have been around 1802, the Reverend explained as he and Dr. Thornton pored over the yellowed pages by candlelight before Hollow Creek was formally established. And now, 30 years later, the brothers. Dr. Thornton finished grimly. But what happens on this night of horror? The journal doesn't say, no, but there's this. Reverend Clark turned to the final pages of the founder's journal, where a crude map had been drawn. It showed the Whispering Woods and a path leading to what could only be the clearing with the stone altar. Scrolled beside it were the words, "The gate must be destroyed before it opens." Armed with this information, Dr. Thornton and Reverend Clark called a meeting of Hollow Creek's adults at the church. There they shared what they had learned. The strange nature of the Blackwood triplets, the ritual in the woods, the historical cycle of disappearances, and the warning in the founder's journal. Many were skeptical, but the recent disappearances and the odd behavior of their children had primed the settlement for acceptance of even the most outlandish explanations. When Jacob, Miller's wife, revealed that their son had been drawing the same strange symbols found in the Blackwood house, symbols he could not have seen, the last resistance crumbled. "What do we do?" Sheriff Hollister asked, his usual confidence shaken. "How do we fight something like this?" "We find the gate," Dr. Thornton said firmly, "and we destroy it before the full moon rises tomorrow night." A group of 20 men volunteered for the expedition, arming themselves with rifles, axes, and torches. Using the map from the founder's journal, they set out for the Whispering Woods at dawn, determined to locate the clearing and destroy whatever gate might exist there before the Blackwood brothers could complete their mysterious purpose. This time the forest did not shift and confuse them, a fact that Dr. Thornton found more unsettling than reassuring. It was as if whatever presence controlled the woods wanted them to find the clearing, wanted them to witness what was to come. They reached the stone altar by midday, the clearing exactly as Dr. Thornton remembered it. But now surrounding the altar stood dozens of crude effigies made from twigs and bone, each shaped like a child, each leaking the same clear, viscous fluid that the doctor had come to associate with the Blackwood brothers. "Destroy them," Reverend Clark commanded, and the men set about smashing the effigies and examining the altar for any sign of the gate mentioned in the journal. The stone structure appeared solid, with no obvious mechanism or opening that could constitute a gateway. But carved into its surface were the now familiar symbols arranged in a spiral pattern that seemed to draw the eye inward, creating a dizzying sensation for anyone who looked too long. As the men worked to break apart the altar with their axes, Dr. Thornton noticed something alarming. The clear fluid from the broken effigies was not seeping into the ground, but flowing together, forming small rivulets that were moving with purpose toward the edge of the clearing. "Stop!" he shouted. "The fluid, it's moving." But his warning came too late. The rivulet had reached the trees and begun to climb up their trunks, the clear substance taking on a faint, pulsing glow as it spread, and from the forest emerged the three forms Dr. Thornton had feared to see again. The Blackwood brothers, no longer infants, but appearing as young boys of perhaps 8 or 9 years. Though it had been only months since their birth, their growth was not the only change. Where before they had been pale and translucent, now they glowed with an inner light, the symbols beneath their skin pulsing in rhythm with the fluid that spread through the trees. Their faces, still identical, had elongated, their eyes larger and entirely white, their mouths too wide for human children. Behind them came the children of Hollowcreek, walking in a trance-like state, their eyes glazed and their movements stiff, as if they were puppets controlled by unseen strings. "They are here," one of the Blackwood brothers said, his voice a chorus of 3 speaking in perfect unison. "The vessels are ready. The gate will open. Get away from our children, Sheriff." Hollister raised his rifle. But before he could fire, one of the Blackwood brothers made a fluid gesture with his hand. The sheriff froze in place, his finger on the trigger, unable to move or speak. One by one, the men of Hollowcreek found themselves paralyzed, able only to watch as the Blackwood brothers approached the altar, leading the entranced children with them. Dr. Thornton struggled against the invisible force that held him, his mind racing to understand what was happening and how to stop it. The Blackwood triplets positioned themselves around the stone altar, forming a triangle. Between them, they arranged the children of Hollowcreek in concentric circles, each child standing rigidly at precise intervals. "Where is Ezekiel?" Dr. Thornton managed to ask, finding that while he could not move, he could still speak. "Where is your father?" The three brothers turned their oversized eyes toward him in unison, their two wide mouths stretching into identical smiles that revealed teeth like polished crystal. "Father has served his purpose," they replied in their unsettling chorus. "The shepherd is no longer needed once the flock has found its path." "And what path is that?" Reverend Clark called out, apparently also able to speak despite his paralysis. "What do you intend to do with these children?" "We will open their minds as ours were opened," the brothers responded. "They will become like us, vessels for those who wait beyond. This world is to be remade in the image of our true fathers." "Your true fathers?" Dr. Thornton asked. "Those who seeded this world long before your kind crawled from the mud," the brothers explained, their voices taking on an ancient quality that belied their childish appearance. "Those who have waited in the spaces between for the perfect vessels to be born. We are the first. These children will be the next. And when the gate opens with the rising of the full moon, our true fathers will return to claim what has always been theirs." As they spoke, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. The fluid that had spread throughout the trees began to glow more brightly, creating a network of luminous veins that pulsed in time with the symbols beneath the brothers' skin. Dr. Thornton realized with mounting horror that the entire forest had become part of whatever ritual was unfolding. The trees, the altar, the brothers, the entranced children, all connected by the pulsing glowing fluid. The gate was not a physical structure, but a pattern, a living circuit being created through the forest itself. "We must stop this," he said to Reverend Clark, whose paralyzed form stood nearest to him. "If what they say is true, whatever comes through that gate will mean the end of everything we know." "Pray, Doctor," the Reverend replied, his voice tight with fear. "Pray as you have never prayed before." But Dr. Thornton was a man of science, not faith. As the sky darkened and the full moon began to rise above the trees, he searched desperately for a solution based in the physical world, not the spiritual. His eyes fell upon the stone altar, the focus of the pattern, the center of the circuit. If he could somehow break the connection with all his mental strength, he fought against the paralysis that held him, focusing on the smallest movements. A twitch of his finger, a flex of his foot. The effort was excruciating, like pushing against an immovable weight. But gradually, infinitesimally, he felt his right hand begin to move toward the pocket of his coat. The Blackwood brothers had begun a chant, their voices rising and falling in that same inhuman language Dr. Thornton had heard Ezekiel use months before. The entranced children swayed in place, their mouths moving to form the same words, though no sound emerged from their lips. Above the full moon reached its zenith, its light seeming to concentrate on the clearing like a spotlight from the heavens. Dr. Thornton's fingers finally reached his pocket and closed around the object he sought. A small glass vial of silver. Nitrate, a caustic solution he used for cauterizing wounds. If he could somehow apply it to the altar, disrupt the symbols carved there. With agonizing slowness, he worked the vial from his pocket and clutched it in his trembling hand. The moon's light grew impossibly bright, and the air in the clearing began to shimmer, as if the boundary between worlds was becoming thin and permeable. The gate opens. The Blackwood brothers in, their voices rising to a fever pitch. Our fathers come. Above the altar, the air split, not with a sound, but with a sensation that pressed against Dr. Thornton's mind like a physical weight. Through the tear in reality, he glimpsed something that his rational mind could barely comprehend. Shapes that shifted and changed, geometries that should not exist, beings of light and void that moved with terrible purpose toward the opening between worlds. With a final, desperate effort, Dr. Thornton hurled the vial of silver nitrate toward the altar. His aim was true. The glass shattered against the stone, the caustic liquid splashing across the carved symbols and sizzling on contact. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The pattern broken, the circuit disrupted, the gate began to collapse in upon itself. The Blackwood brothers screamed in unified agony, their fluid forms losing cohesion as the connection to their true fathers was severed. The paralysis holding the men of Hollowcreek suddenly lifted and chaos erupted in the clearing. The entranced children collapsed like marionettes with cut strings, while the glowing fluid that had spread throughout the trees began to rain down like burning tears. Get the children, Dr. Thornton shouted, rushing to gather the nearest fallen forms. Get them out of the clearing. The men scrambled to obey, each grabbing a child and running for the edge of the woods. Above, the tear in reality contracted, the glimpsed horrors receding into whatever dimension had spawned them. But the Blackwood brothers were not retreating. Instead, they were transforming yet again, their already fluid bodies melting further, merging together into a single writhing mass of translucent flesh and pulsing symbols. You cannot stop what has begun. Doctor, they spoke, their three voices now layered and distorted, emanating from different parts of their combined form. The gate was opened, if only for a moment. The seed has been planted. Our fathers will find another way, another time, another vessel. The merged entity that had once been the three brothers flowed across the ground toward Dr. Thornton, who found himself the last man in the clearing. Having ensured all the children were being carried to safety, he backed away, searching for an escape. But the fluid mass moved with impossible speed, surrounding him as it had in their first encounter months ago. Your knowledge served us well, the entity said, tendrils of its substance reaching out to touch the doctor's skin. But now, you know too much. You have interfered with a process set in motion centuries before your birth. There is a price for such interference. Dr. Thornton felt the burning sensation again as the entity made contact with his flesh. But this time it was accompanied by images flooding his mind. Visions of worlds beyond human comprehension, of civilizations risen and fallen before mankind took its first steps, of beings that existed beyond the constraints of flesh and bone and blood. You wanted understanding, Doctor, the entity whispered directly into his mind. We give you understanding, but knowledge has its cost. With those words, the entity began to flow into Dr. Thornton through his pores, his nose, his mouth. his eyes filling him with its substance, with its impossible knowledge. He tried to scream, but his voice was drowned in the fluid invasion of his body. From the edge of the clearing, Reverend Clark and Sheriff Hollister watched in horror as Dr. Thornton's form distorted, his body stretching and bending in ways that no human frame should allow. For a moment, the symbols that had pulsed beneath the brother's skin appeared on the doctor's flesh, glowing with that same unearthly light. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The fluid entity vanished, absorbed completely into Dr. Thornton's body, which collapsed to the forest floor, motionless. "Dear God," Sheriff Hollister whispered. "Is he?" "I don't know," Reverend Clark replied grimly. "But we can't leave him here." Together they cautiously approached the fallen physician. As they drew near, Dr. Thornton's eyes snapped open, but they were no longer the warm brown they had been. Instead, they were the colorless white of the Blackwood brothers, though they quickly shifted back to their normal hue as the men watched. "Samuel," the Reverend said hesitantly. "Are you yourself?" Dr. Thornton sat up slowly, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if he was relearning how to use his own body. When he spoke, his voice was raspy and strange. I think so," he managed to say. "They're inside me. Their knowledge too much. Can't contain it." "All the brothers?" Sheriff Hollister asked. "They're inside you?" "What's left of them?" Dr. Thornton confirmed, struggling to his feet with the men's assistance. "They are dying, fading without the connection to their fathers. But they've left something behind in me." "What do we do now?" the sheriff asked, looking to Reverend Clark for guidance. "We take care of our children," the Reverend answered firmly. "We destroy that altar completely, and we watch Dr. Thornton very carefully." In the days that followed, Hollowcreek began the slow process of recovery. The children who had been entranced showed no lasting effects beyond a collective amnesia regarding the events in the clearing. The stone altar was demolished, its fragments buried in consecrated ground behind the church. The Whispering Woods, once avoided out of vague superstition, was now shunned entirely, with talk of burning it down to ensure nothing like the Blackwood incident could happen again. As for Dr. Thornton, he isolated himself in his cabin, emerging only to treat medical emergencies. Those who saw him reported that he seemed changed, his movement sometimes fluid in a way that recalled the Blackwood brothers, his eyes occasionally shifting to that colorless white when he thought no one was watching. He filled journal after journal with writings and drawings, some in English, documenting his medical observations and theories about what had happened, but others in strange alphabets and languages that no one in Hollowcreek could identify. He spoke of the knowledge left behind and his struggle to integrate it without losing his humanity. 2 months after the incident in the clearing, Dr. Thornton called Reverend Clark to his cabin. The preacher found the physician pale and gaunt, his hands trembling as he handed over a sealed letter. "I'm leaving Hollowcreek," Dr. Thornton announced without preamble. "What's inside me? It's growing stronger. I fear what I might become if I remain among people." "Where will you go?" the Reverend asked. "West," the doctor replied. "As far from civilization as I can get. There are things I need to understand, things I need to contain." and the letter to be opened only if I don't return within 1 year. Dr. Thornton instructed, it contains everything I've learned about the Blackwood brothers, about the entities they called their true fathers, about the gate and the cycle. Knowledge that might be needed if they find another way back. Reverend Clark accepted the letter solemnly. Is there nothing that can be done for you, Samuel? Dr. Thornton's eyes briefly flashed white, before returning to their normal color. Pray for me, Reverend, not for my salvation. I fear that's beyond reach now. But for my strength, whatever the Blackwood brothers were becoming, whatever knowledge they've left within me, I cannot allow it to be used to open the gate again. The following morning, Dr. Samuel Thornton departed Hollow Creek on horseback, heading west toward the territories. He was never seen in the settlement again. 1 year later, as instructed, Reverend Clark opened the letter. Inside was a detailed account of everything that had occurred, along with Dr. Thornton's theories about the nature of the Blackwood brothers and the entities they had tried to summon. But most disturbing was the final page, a warning written in a hand that grew increasingly fluid and unnatural as it progressed. The cycle is not broken, merely delayed. They will try again in another 30 years. Watch for the signs. A. Winter birth, children without structure, the whispering in the woods growing louder. The knowledge lives on in me, but I cannot contain it forever. What I am becoming. It frightens me. I travel now to a place where I can do no harm, where the knowledge can be buried with me, but remember they are patient. They have waited millennia. They will wait again. And when the stars align once more, when the perfect vessels are born, watch the children of Hollow Creek. The letter was sealed with a strange symbol, the same that had pulsed beneath the skin of the Blackwood brothers. Reverend Clark shared the letter with Sheriff Hollister and the town council, and together they established a watch, tradition passed down through generations of Hollow Creek's residents. Every 30 years, when the cycle was predicted to return, the settlement, which eventually grew into a proper town, would appoint guardians to monitor for the signs Dr. Thornton had described. For decades, no signs appeared. The Whispering Woods gradually reclaimed the Blackwood farm, and the story of the 3 brothers born without bones or blood became little more than a local legend. A tale told to frighten children and entertain visitors. But in the winter of 1892, exactly 60 years after the birth of the Blackwood triplets, a traveler passing through Hollow Creek reported a strange encounter at the edge of the woods. A man whose movements were fluid like water, whose eyes shifted from brown to colorless white, who spoke of vessels and fathers and a gate that must remain closed. The man claimed to be Dr. Samuel Thornton, though he should have been well over 80 years old by then, and the traveler described him as appearing no more than 40, before disappearing back into the Whispering Woods. The man left a message for the current reverend and sheriff. The knowledge grows stronger. I cannot contain it much longer. When the perfect vessels are born again, I may not be able to resist the calling. Watch for me as you watch for them, and if necessary, do what must be done. To this day, the people of Hollow Creek, now a small city with little connection to its frontier origins, maintain the watch, though few remember why. Every 30 years, a select group gathers to monitor for signs of strange births, for children who move like water, for the whispering in the woods growing louder. And they watch for a man who should have died nearly 2 centuries ago, a physician who sacrificed his humanity to prevent something worse from entering our world. A guardian whose vigil may yet fail. 4. The cycle continues, the knowledge waits. And somewhere in the wilderness, Dr. Samuel Thornton, or whatever he has become, still walks the last of the vessels containing within him the terrible truth of what lurks beyond the gate, waiting for its chance to return. The Blackwood brothers were born without bones or blood. But what they became was far more terrifying. A warning of what might yet come again. When the stars align and the perfect vessels are born. Once more. The whispering grows louder. The cycle turns. The watch continues. And somewhere in the woods, something fluid moves.